Aaliyah's tray trembled as a room full of billionaires laughed. Ethan Cole raised his glass, the ice clinking like mock applause. "If you can serve me in Mandarin," he said, his grin stretching wider, "I'll give you $100,000. The crisp bills fell onto her silver tray like falling ash. The entire restaurant went silent. Crystal chandeliers, white linen, and whispered cruelty hanging in the air. Waiters froze mid-step. The only black woman in that hall now stood center stage, her uniform spotless, her pride barely holding back the fire in her chest. Ethan leaned back in his chair, confidence dripping from every word. "Come on, sweetheart. Show these investors how educated you are." A few men chuckled, pretending not to stare, phones half raised, ready to record humiliation. Aaliyah met his eyes and didn't blink. "Are you sure you can afford that lesson, mister?" "Cole," she said quietly. The laughter thinned. Even the air seemed to hesitate. In that moment, no one realized the storm had already begun. Quiet, calculated, and far smarter than any of them could imagine. If this already made your blood boil, hit like and subscribe right now, because stories like this are still happening and the world needs to hear them. Ethan's smirk twitched. The waitress's calm scared him more than her words. He pushed the stack of bills closer. "You have 10 minutes to prove your worth, even one of these." Aaliyah straightened her shoulders, balancing the tray like a crown. The crowd waited for her to fold. Instead, she whispered to herself, "Let him laugh. I've survived worse than noise." The noise of the restaurant faded, replaced by memories that hurt more than any insult. 3 years ago, Aaliyah Jones wasn't carrying trays. She was carrying lectures, professor of linguistics at Columbia University, teaching classrooms full of students who once hung on every word she spoke. Back then, her name meant respect. Now it was printed on a waitress badge. Her fall hadn't come from failure. It came from love. Her mother, Dorothy Jones, had a stroke that winter. Hospital bills stacked higher than her salary. Insurance delayed, then denied. Aaliyah sold her car, her jewelry, even her graduate thesis laptop. Everything except her dignity. When her savings ran out, so did her job. She swapped textbooks for dinner plates and traded applause for empty tips. Every night she promised herself it was temporary, just until her mother recovered. But temporary had stretched into years. At the clinic in Harlem where her mother lay, the machines hummed louder than hope. "Don't worry about me," Dorothy would whisper, half awake. "You're my miracle." Those words kept Aaliyah alive. By day she cared for her mother. By night she worked at the Prestige Club, serving men who never looked at her face. They saw only a uniform, not the woman who once lectured in 9 languages. Sometimes she'd steal moments in the break room, reading Mandarin notes on her phone, keeping her mind sharp in secret. She couldn't let the world erase who she used to be. Each insult from a customer only added fuel to the quiet fire building inside her. That's why tonight felt different. Ethan Cole's challenge wasn't just about money. It was about everything she had lost and everything she was ready to reclaim. Ethan's voice echoed to the marble hall, loud enough for every table to hear. "So, Professor," he mocked, ready to prove that college degree means something. The crowd laughed. Polite, poisonous laughter that filled the gaps between clinking glasses. Aaliyah didn't move. Her eyes stayed on the tray, her breathing slow, steady. She could feel 50 stares crawling across her skin, each one daring her to break. One of the waiters whispered near the bar, "Why doesn't she walk away?" Because Aaliyah couldn't. She wasn't just standing there for herself. She was standing for every insult she'd swallowed for 3 long years. Ethan leaned closer, lowering his voice like he was sharing a secret. "Don't take it so hard, sweetheart. We both know you people aren't built for this kind of competition." That one line cracked through the air like a whip. The investors shifted uneasily. A Japanese businessman coughed, eyes down, but Ethan enjoyed the silence too much to stop. "Here's the deal," he said, tapping the bills with his gold pen. "You speak Mandarin. You win. But if you fail, you apologize right here in front of everyone." He grinned. "And maybe we'll throw in a tip if you cry nicely." Phones tilted up again. Someone whispered, "This is going viral." The cameras caught everything. Her uniform, her skin, her stillness. Every second dragged like an hour. But inside her head, Aaliyah wasn't hearing Ethan anymore. She was hearing her mother's voice. Never let them decide who you are. Her knuckles whitened around the tray. The sound of champagne cork popping broke the tension. And Ethan laughed again. "What's wrong, sweetheart? Cat got your tongue." Aaliyah looked up slowly. "Not quite," she said. "I'm just deciding how expensive your lesson should be." A murmur rippled across the room. Ethan blinked, unsure if he'd just been insulted or challenged. He took a sip, pretended to laugh it off, but his hand trembled slightly. The crowd could sense it too. Something had shifted. The woman he meant to humiliate wasn't backing down. She was baiting him. "If this happened right in front of you, what would you do? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. And if you want justice as much as I do, hit subscribe." Ethan leaned back, folding his arms like a king watching his court. "Well, you still standing there, or are you ready to back out gracefully?" Aaliyah placed a tray on the nearest table and spoke calmly. "I accept your bet, Mr. Cole." The laughter died. Someone dropped a fork. The sound echoed through the quiet hall. Ethan blinked. "Excuse me? I'll serve you in Mandarin," she said. "And if I win, you'll pay me double $200,000 in front of everyone here." The crowd gasped. Ethan smirked. "Double? You're confident for someone who couldn't even afford a seat in this place." "Confidence isn't for sale," Aaliyah replied. "But you'll learn that tonight." The Japanese investors exchanged glances. One of them, Yuki, whispered something under his breath, a single word Ethan didn't understand. "Respect." "Fine," Ethan said, pretending to yawn. $200,000 if you win. But if you fail," he paused, savoring the attention, "you'll apologize here on your knees and work free for a month." The crowd murmured. Even the waiters froze, unsure if they should keep serving or just watch. Aaliyah didn't flinch. "Agreed." Ethan grinned like a man who'd already won. "Good. Bring the special Chinese menu," he told the waiter. "Let's make it official." The waiter hesitated. "Sir, that menu has over 40 items. It's written in simplified Mandarin." "Perfect," Ethan said. "Wouldn't want to make it too easy for Professor." Aaliyah's eyes stayed locked on him. She could see it now, the small twitch at the corner of his jaw, the overcompensation in his smile. He wasn't as confident as he looked. Arrogance was just his armor, and she had already found the crack. While the waiter fetched the menu, Aaliyah's mind drifted to her mother's voice again. "Don't ever hide your brilliance to make them comfortable." That single line steadied her heartbeat. She adjusted her uniform, lifted her chin, and whispered to herself, "Let's end this." The door opened. The waiter returned, holding a leather-bound menu covered in Chinese characters. Ethan snatched it, glanced inside, and smirked. 40 dishes, each one more complicated than the last. "Think you can read that?" Aaliyah didn't answer. She simply smiled, that same quiet smile that had started to scare him. The waiter placed the heavy menu on the table. Dozens of symbols filled the pages like a coded wall. Ethan pushed it toward her with a grin. "Go on, genius. Impress us." Aaliyah didn't even glance at him. She opened the menu slowly, scanning the pages as if reading a story she'd written herself. The room went silent again. Even the air felt suspended. She looked up, met the eyes of the investors, and spoke, calm, steady, fluent. Her voice carried confidence, precision, grace. Every sentence rolled like music. Every pause felt intentional. The men at the next table stopped eating. One whispered, "That's flawless." Ethan's smirk faded, confusion replacing arrogance. He tried to laugh it off. "Cute trick. You memorized a few lines, huh?" But one of the investors raised his hand. "Mister Cole, she's describing the dishes perfectly. Textures, origins, even history." A hush fell over the hall. Aaliyah continued, her tone unwavering, explaining flavors and traditions with the calm authority of a scholar. Each line carried power, not from translation, but from truth. Phone started recording again, but now for a different reason. The humiliation had flipped. The woman everyone expected to fail had just turned the room into her classroom. Ethan's fingers tightened around his glass. "Enough!" he shouted. No one obeyed. The investors were mesmerized, nodding, applauding quietly as she finished. When Aaliyah finally closed the menu, her last words landed like thunder. "This is what education sounds like, Mr. Cole. You should try it sometime." The entire restaurant burst into quiet disbelief, a stunned silence that said everything words couldn't. Ethan's face was pale, his confidence drained. He looked like a man watching his empire collapse one truth at a time. The room stayed frozen. No one clapped, no one spoke. They just stared at her. Aaliyah stood tall, hands steady at her sides, the kind of calm that made even the powerful feel small. Ethan Cole tried to speak, but the words tangled in his throat. She rehearsed this," he stammered, looking around for backup. But no one came. The investors exchanged glances, disappointment written across their faces. One of them finally said, "Mr. Cole, you owe her $200,000. Ethan laughed nervously. "It was just a game." "No." Yuki interrupted sharply. "You made it a lesson, and now it's yours to pay for." The cameras caught everything. His trembling hands, the sweat on his forehead, the woman he called uneducated standing like a pillar of dignity. Each second of silence made him smaller. He pulled a checkbook from his jacket, scribbling a shaky signature. When he handed it over, Aaliyah didn't even look at the amount. She folded it once, slipped it into her pocket, and said quietly, "This was never about money. It was about respect. Something you'll never afford." A single clap broke the tension. Then another. Soon the entire restaurant joined in slow, deliberate applause that echoed off marble walls. Ethan turned red. He tried to stand, but his legs barely supported him. Yuki leaned toward him, voice cold. "My company doesn't invest in men who humiliate others to feel powerful. The deal's off." Ethan froze. $200 million. Gone with one sentence. The crowd parted as Aaliyah walked past, every eye following her. She paused only once beside his table. "You asked for a show," she said. "I hope you learned something worth the ticket." No one laughed this time. The only sound was the steady rhythm of her heels leaving the hall, and the quiet collapse of a man who'd finally met someone he couldn't buy or break. 6 months later, the Manhattan skyline gleamed outside a tall glass window. Aaliyah stood behind a polished desk with her name engraved in gold. Director of Intercultural Relations, Sato International. Her mother's laughter drifted to the phone speaker, soft and healthy again. "Baby, I told you," Dorothy said. "You were never meant to serve tables. You were meant to stand on stages." Aaliyah smiled. Guess the universe finally agreed. Her life had rebuilt itself quietly. No headlines, no noise, just steady progress. She'd turned the same humiliation that once broke her into the reason she rose. Now, she helped companies train leaders to understand diversity, respect, and humanity. Across town, Ethan Cole's world looked very different. The viral video of his meltdown had burned through social media like wildfire. "Racist tycoon destroyed by waitress." The caption alone was enough to end him. His investors walked away. His company collapsed. He sold his mansion, his cars, even the last watch he'd worn that night. One afternoon, Aaliyah saw him again by accident. He was parking cars outside a midtown hotel, wearing a faded uniform and a forced smile. Their eyes met for a brief second. No anger, no revenge, just silence. She gave a polite nod. He looked down, too ashamed to speak. Aaliyah turned away, the city lights reflecting off her face like quiet victory. She whispered to herself, "Dignity lasts longer than money." The camera would fade here. Her walking toward the skyline, a woman who proved that intelligence and respect can rebuild a life, even when the world tries to strip away. If you believe this should never happen again, share this now. And to my USA, UK, and Canadian viewers, your voice is power. Use it.